Hey Arthur, I figured it'd be easier just to record a video than trying to explain all this. So you told me you wanted to learn how to do screen curvature and chromatic aberration, kind of in the way that this mockup is. So I'll just quickly run you through some of those. First of all, since I'm not sure how familiar you are with smart objects, I'll kind of go over some basics of it. You may know some of this, you may not, but at least I'll kind of know that you're at the level you would need to understand how some of these effects work. So if you were wanting to create a new smart object, you would basically, create a new layer, draw some artwork. You could also have, text in there. Um, you could even do, like a vector object or anything like that. Once you kind of have all the content laid out that you want to put in there, you would select all the layers you want to put in a smart object, right click, convert to smart object. Smart objects are basically just PSDs embedded inside other PSDs. So the real benefit to that, at least the way that Photoshop kind of originally imagined it, was that you could have a non-destructive way of scaling or editing or modifying things that would retain all the settings that you had. So if I did that and then opened up my smart object, you can see that everything inside this embedded PST is still retained. So if I went back and did a free transform on this, I'm pushing Control T in case you didn't know about that command, but this gives you the ability, scale it back up. It's non-destructive. Obviously, it'll pixelate if you go larger than the original size of the object, so you can kind of see the pixelation happening there. But really, it just gives you, that flexibility of editing it after the fact. Anyhow, the when you create a new smart object, by default, it sets the bounds to the extents of the content that you put in there. So this won't work when you're trying to do screen curvature because you want the curvature to be uniform to the size of the actual document. So the way to do that would be to go inside your smart object after you've created it. Go to Image, Canvas Size. Set this to be the same size as your document. So we can do 1920 by 1080. This will be padding around here. And then if I were to save this and then go back to my root mockup, you won't notice anything visually different, but it's actually changed the bounding size of that smart object. So you can now set this back to center, which is hard to manually line up. So you can just use the properties up here. So um, easy way to do it would just be to set this little alignment pin to the top left and then set it to 0, 0. So that's perfectly centered. And now if I were to put screen curvature on this, go back to your free transform with Control T, and then kind of hard to find, but it's this tiny little tool up here, which is switch between free transform and warp modes. So if you click on this, you go into warp mode and you'll see this drop down appear for warp. Screen curvature you can do by doing bulge. So if I click bulge, by default it bulges it out. But if you drag this down below 0, it'll actually make it bend inwards. So you can do a screen curvature effect that way. Um, if you deselect that or you hit OK and you want to get back into there, by default, every time you go to free transform, it does the not warped mode, but you can click on this on smart objects at least, and it'll actually retain the curvature you set. So it's a quick way you can go back and tweak it, if you decide you want it to be more extreme in curvature or not. Anyways, that's how smart objects work and how curvature works. On all of these layers that I've made, you'll notice that I made the smart object aspect ratio a little bit taller because I wanted content to come to the edge of the screen at the center where it's warped in. So if I switch over to warp mode, you can kind of see that I get this effect. So inside the actual smart object, I just have to make sure um, nothing comes to the edge, in the corners, because those will get clipped off. One other thing that's useful about smart objects, because I mentioned that all of these are the same instance. So if I double click on any of these, you'll notice that they open the same smart object window. That's by default. Photoshop does that. So if I were to, drag this down to new layer or hold down Alt and drag to make a copy, it will actually make this as a new instance. So you'll see that the new instance just opens the same thing. If you ever don't want that behavior, the way to duplicate would be to right click and go to new smart object via copy. What this will do is it'll make a copy of it, but it'll make it as a new instance. So if I then double click on this one, also make sure you're double clicking on the thumbnail to open these, because if you double click outside of the thumbnail, it'll either open your layer style, or if you double click on the text, it'll try to rename it. So the way to access smart objects is double click on the thumbnail. But you'll see that this has opened a new window. So even though it's identical right now, it's a new smart object. So if I make a new layer and like draw some stuff on here and save it, you'll see that it's applied to that smart object copy, but it's not applied to the other ones. So if I were to duplicate this, it would be a new instance of my copied smart object. Just interesting to note if you ever need that. So basically, since all of these are the same object, anytime I want to edit something in here, like say I want to just view, because I have a whole bunch of different widgets in these that I've mocked up. So, if I want to see the map screen or the media screen or the software screen, I could, make those changes in here. I have different navigation for these buttons. So I'll turn like inventory off and the software overstate on since I'm on the software tab. Um, if I save this, I got to make sure to hide the background layer because uh, it's just laid over the top of the scene in the basic mockup here. You can see that since all of these are the same instance, it's applied it to every single one, and then all of the effects are kind of achieved outside of that. So that's how you can change things in here, export different states without really having to do much work on the top level here, and all of your effects get applied. So the other thing I'm doing for chromatic aberration is you'll see I have 3 instances of the smart object for red, green, and blue channels. The easiest way to do that is to do it with layer styles. So if I double click, not on the thumbnail, I'll open the layer styles for this smart object, and you'll see that there's these channels checkboxes. By default, all these will be checked on. That's basically just full color. But if you have a different instance of these smart objects, you can just check off everything but the one channel for this layer. Green channel just has the green channel checked on, and the blue layer just has the blue channel checked on. And then what you do is you offset your red channel on the X and Y axis by 1 pixel, and the blue channel um, down and to the right by 1 pixel. So if I do free transform on this, you'll see that my blue channel is 1 pixel down and to the right of center, 961 by 541. And my red channel is offset up and to the left by 1 pixel, so 959 by 549. So that's how you can kind of get that offset effect. You can make it more extreme if you want, or you can do it with different scaling values if you want more of like, they call it a screen fringe effect. That's where the chromatic aberration is, like the blue channel is actually scaled uniformly out from center, and the red channel is scaled in towards the center. So that'll give you a slightly different effect than the, just offset by 1 pixel uniformly. But basically this gives you, your 3 channels for your smart objects separated out so that you can do what you want with them. um, these other layers like glow, blur, and black, I mainly did for readability because in some of these other screens, I also have a vignette on these, right? So like this starts to get hard to read, especially when you're in um, these really bright environments. So I put all these, extra layers on. So there's like a black layer that uses the same smart object but applies an outer glow just to kind of intensify the darkness on it. So this is just outer glow multiplied by black, and then a Gaussian blur to make sure it's actually got some feathering around the edges. But the intent was that these were sort of mock-ups of just pure visual style, and that we would recreate these effects in Engine. So blur, I think, just does some vertical blurring on this. Um, and I did it a number of times just because there was like a more smooth, softer effect from doing that. And then curves obviously like messes with the colors a little bit to make sure that it um, reads well. Because you can see the motion blur here is just it just kind of makes everything flat. So curves are a way that you can, if you haven't used this one, you can modify red, green, and blue channel color curves. So you can kind of make an image modulate more towards like a certain color channel to kind of give it some nice added accent. Um, what else can I show you? I guess for the scan lines, at least, I do that with a pattern overlay. So I made this just one off, one on pixel pattern, and then if you use pattern, it just patterns that out over the whole screen, and put it in a soft light mode. So you kind of see if I could scale it here, you can kind of see what the scan lines look like. But yeah, that's that's most of how this thing's set up. Hopefully that answers most of your questions, but tell me if you have any more.